Well, we're trying to keep things moving a little bit. We know having these breaks between sessions is really helpful. So we're going to try to make sure we have a few minutes of break after this one as well. Good afternoon. I'm Kirstin Compitello. I will be the moderator for this session. I'm the National Broadband Digital Equity Director for Michael Baker International. And I'm very proud to be able to introduce this excellent panel that we have for the afternoon, our Getting Connected Digital Equity and Affordability panel. We have some really phenomenal panelists here today. So I'd like to introduce Itha. She is the Director of Digital Inclusion and Innovation for Neighborhood Allies. Lyle Ishida, who is the Chief of the Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division for the Federal Communications Commission, and Alka Patel, Vice President of Government and External Affairs for Comcast Keystone region. Now, I'm following upon the footsteps of John Timney this morning, who was the moderator who brought all the puns. I did not prepare any, but that means you get to hear more from our panelists. And also, we would like to make sure we leave plenty of time for your questions. We're starting a little early, so we have a little extra time. And we certainly hope that you all have questions to share. So standard disclaimer from the morning, please remember you've got index cards on your tables, and as our panelists are speaking and afterwards, as you think of questions, please mark them down, hold your hand up in the air, and someone will come and pick those up so we can take your questions. With that, I'm going to pass it over to our panelists to do some introductions of what they do and their work. I'm going to pass it over to Lyle first. He's our panelist who traveled the furthest to get here today. Lyle, we are so honored to have you here from the FCC. We'd like to ask you to open up by telling us a bit about your work and the actions the FCC is taking to address closing the digital divide equitably for all.
Aloha awinala. I'm from Hawaii, and that means good afternoon. So commit that to memory, and then it's like traveling. Aloha awinala. Thank you, SPC. Thank you for all the attendees for being here and the opportunity for the FCC to speak. Washington, D.C., where I work and I'm from, is a good place to be from a lot. So being on the road is a really great opportunity. I want to start with talking about ACP. And so I usually try to level set on ACP, but this seems to be a really knowledgeable crowd. So if you're there in silence, not sure about ACP's detail, but don't want to single yourself out by raising your hand, go to fcc.gov/ACP, and there's a button there that says book a speaker. That's my team. We'll do individual presentations to you and others who may not be totally ready yet to take the full ACP challenge. We'll do it privately, so nobody needs to know that you've clicked the Zoom button, and we'll do this in whatever hours or weekends that you'd like. And that's not just for folks who are making the ACP challenge now, journey now, but also for people who you may know who you're gonna hire, or people you're going to run into, because it really will take a large crowd, all of us from different levels of engagement, from government, non-government, to help shape a more equitable country in terms of broadband deployment. So here's what we're doing on ACP, right? So we have a bunch of outreach programs, which I'm going to talk about later and want to pitch to you that we think we can help the SPC region with, that is exciting, that we're testing out now in Arizona and Los Angeles. I also want to just sort of talk about, because riff off of what we just heard from our speaker about ACP and affordability. So I want to really get specific. If you are not familiar with the consumer protections that come with the act that establishes the ACP, consumer protections into statute involve requiring providers to allow consumers to apply for the benefit across the plans, not just a specific EBB or ACP plan that's limited for low-income people. It provides, it keeps providers from using credit checks or or existing debt to prohibit consumers from enrolling in ACP. It prohibits the practice of upselling and downselling. And it has in total the goal of trying to eliminate bill shock. And I say this because on pricing on providers is because the benefit, which is $30 a month, right? A while back, if you missed it or did not get there, the president, along with national, local, and regional providers, announced plans that would match up with the benefit. $30 plans, $30 benefit. And for economy, which is choppy, we all have to take a look at the gas prices when we're filling our tank. For people who are working shift work and have to manage these such expenses, having an out-of-pocket net zero benefit, broadband benefit, which is not the worst plan that the ISP can give you, is a way to build opportunity, is a way to build equity into all strata, all parts of our society, and it's there. So this doesn't require a planning document. This doesn't require people to kind of run a grant thing. This just requires awareness and effort down at the grassroots level to inform consumers that in these times of economic churn, this is an opportunity for you to get, if assuming you're in one of these districts where we have these $30 plans, a net zero broadband plan that is not just set aside for the poor. And so I want to start there, and then reserve some time to turn it over to my speakers to talk about, reserve some time to talk later about how we're going to work together to build more awareness, more adoption, and other things that the FCC is doing in terms of digital equity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lyle. I'm going to move on to Alka. You represent one of the major internet service providers in this region and nationally. And I think you have some slides ready to queue up as well. We'd love to hear from you what your organization is doing to address the digital divide.
Great. Thank you, Kirstin, and thank you, SPC, for the invitation to be here with all of you today. It's been an amazing day so far, a lot of learnings, and I think as the panel goes on, as the afternoon goes on, there'll be a number of reoccurring themes as well. So just as a quick background, I think you guys all have our bios and so forth, but I've been at Comcast for about 1.5 years now, and my job is to lead our government and community affairs efforts. And the territory, the Keystone region, when you see Keystone region, that is the area we cover most of Pennsylvania. Philly, as many of you know, is our headquarters area, so we do have a sister region there. And then we cover parts of West Virginia, Maryland, and Ohio that border Pennsylvania. So I really have an interesting lens to see not only what's happening in Pennsylvania, but our neighboring states, which gives us a lot of perspective, and again, a lot of synergies between what Anna had talked about earlier and some of the other speakers. I will just start with a bit of an anecdote. So my background, full disclosure, is not broadband. My background is AI, emerging tech, and everyone's like, why are you at Comcast? And as an aside, I did not even realize that Comcast is the #1 tech company in Pennsylvania. That was a bonus when I got hired. But really, it was because of my time in DC. So I was in DC prior to coming to Comcast for about 2 years, working in the AI and emerging tech space. And what I realized is, technology is coming fast and furious, and we really can't be talking about technology unless our communities are connected. And we've all talked about this moment in time, this is a historic moment. But really being in those conversations, and Lyle, I'm sure you're seeing this too, right? It truly is a moment in time. And, and I'll just take a step back too, for all of you techies who've been looking at this ChatGPT-3 tool that's come out, right? Like it's going fast and furious. And also I will just say too, it's not just about technology. It is about workforce development, for example. We talk about areas where there are missing opportunities in terms of roles in cybersecurity. How are our local governments going to be able to fill the needs? How are our companies going to be able to fill the needs? All of this doesn't come together unless our communities are connected. And frankly, or at the federal government, there could be programs that can address a lot of the needs. However, where the rubber meets the road is in the local level. And that is why I came to Comcast. I wanted to be on the ground. We know our communities best. All of you know your communities best. You know what your communities need. Each community is different. The needs are different. The resources are different. And so how do we think about bridging that digital divide? And so, again, really 2 reasons why I came to Comcast. One, having that lens and that context coming into this role. But the other is Comcast's commitment to digital equity. And actually, if we did want to go to the slides, we could go ahead and advance. And again, forgive me, these are corporate slides. And these are actually
My slides.
Itha slides, so we'll just pass through those and get to the Comcast ones.
We know what you're gonna
Itha,
say
I'd
now.
love to talk about your work, but you probably don't want me doing that.
All good, yeah.
So the second reason of why I'm at Comcast is really twofold. One is leadership, and the second is commitment to a cause. So what you see on the slide ahead of you, or behind me, I should say, is a quote from our CEO, Brian Roberts. And it really embodies his commitment that has really integrated into our company's DNA. I'm not going to read the quote. You guys can all read it for yourself. Point being, though, is the fact that digital equity is integrated into the DNA of our organization. And I'm going to go a step further. It's not even just our organization. It's our culture. It's everything that we do. It's integrated into our business objectives. And so for me, that was compelling enough, right? Again, sort of leaning on my prior experiences in DC, it wasn't just about leadership. It was also about resources. And so in 2021, Comcast committed a $1 billion commitment to an initiative called Project Up. And I think on some of your tables, you might have a little postcard, and if not, at our table outside. But it talks about our Project Up commitment. And you're probably thinking, Up? Thinking about the movie Up? I don't know where that came from. But Up, the UP stands for Unlimited Possibilities. And I initially thought, well, it's a bit of corporate speak, isn't that? Project Up. But what I've since realized in my time at Comcast is that our world is evolving, the needs are evolving. And so unlimited possibilities, yes, allows us to have the breadth that we need to think about how do we solve for digital equity. So to get to the specifics around some of our efforts, and we can advance to the next slide, please. Again, this is visual. I'm not going to go through the slide. You can take a look at it at your leisure. But I'm going to talk about a couple initiatives. And most of that was around the 2021 timeframe. COVID hit. We needed to get our communities connected, right? And so we did it in a number of different ways. I'm going to highlight 3 in particular. One is called lift zones. And lift zones, we're finding community centers or places of community gatherings that we could outfit with free Wi-Fi. So many of us have heard the stories about how students and children didn't have a place to do their homework, and they're in the parking lots of McDonald's and all of these other places where they were just trying to get what they need to get done. And so over the last 3 years, we've outfitted 1,000 centers across the nation, 100 being in our Keystone footprint, so that individuals who didn't have access at home could go to a place, a safe place, where they could get connected. In addition, those lift zones also became a gathering place for providing digital literacy skills, and you'll hear more about that as the discussion goes on. So these places were really a way to help solve the accessibility issue when we were thinking about COVID. The other is our RISE program, which was a commitment to small businesses, so minority-owned, women-owned small businesses. We know small businesses are the heart of our communities, right? This is how we do it at the local level. And so we really wanted to make sure that they were supported. And so we had programs, and we do have open grant periods where we offer marketing and technology makeovers for these organizations to help them continue, to give them the resources, to give them the visibility, to give them the connectivity. Additionally, some of you may have heard last year, We did commit $1 million to small businesses. There were $110,000 grants to also help through the COVID period. And then the last piece I'll just highlight really high level is our Internet Essentials product. So you heard a lot about affordability. Lyle, you just talked about that. We're going on to our 12th year of offering a product at $9.95. So we were trying to make it affordable for low-income families before COVID hit. Obviously, with EBB, ACP, there are opportunities where we have plans with even higher speeds, where it is making it net zero, as you mentioned, right? But we didn't stop with just making a product that was $9.95. We've been continuing to invest in that product in terms of increasing speeds and also increasing eligibility. So not just low income, but Pell Grant recipients and so forth. So our commitment, again, continues and is embedded in our business objectives. I'll just wrap really briefly with just another piece of this to tie some of the conversation that we heard earlier today. So yes, we're doing our part in terms of accessibility and affordability, but the key issue, and I think we've heard this from Nicole, we've heard it from many others, is really around adoption. How do we get people to really adopt connectivity, the internet, right? And so there's actual data out there that really supports the fact that we can address accessibility and affordability, but it's the adoption piece. And so last year, the Boston Consulting Group issued a study, and again, I think it's on the back, there are QR codes if anyone's interested in the details of the study. But they looked at what is the barrier? What is the barrier to adoption? Why aren't people doing it? Put aside the money issue, put aside these other issues. Why aren't they adopting? And they had a whole list of reasons. One, structural barriers. We heard that from Anna when she was talking about housing, how infrastructure perhaps may have not been, have the right wiring and so forth. Digital skills, which we'll talk about. Distrust of programs, distrust of the government, distrust of all of these other pieces. Language barriers, and awareness. And of course, with ACP, we'll talk about that as well. And so in this report, what BCG came out with is the need for what they're calling digital navigators. And some of you may have heard these terms before, but these digital navigators are trusted partners. So like neighborhood allies, many of the other organizations, there's United Way, I know there's a number of organizations in the room here. They are trusted partners who are able to bridge the gap between perhaps an ISP and or another organization, maybe the Broadband Authority, and the people who need it the most. I will tell you, I think Nicole, not to come back to your presentation a bit, but you had talked about your grandmother and getting access to the internet. I will tell you, I'll take it one step further to my mother. She won't come to me, she'll go to my teenager. Again, I would go to my teenager as an aside, but she'll go to my teenager, and it's those trusted partners and relationships that are really gonna move the needle on digital equity. So I do wanna just highlight really quickly two or three other pieces. I already talked about the lift zones. Again, the Lemoyne Center in Washington County with some of their programming has been instrumental in moving the needle. We've been working with the Veterans Leadership Program, and while they're based in Pittsburgh, they have sites in all over the state, frankly, and we've been working with their facility in Altoona and thinking about how do we get these veterans connected. And they're actually using a mobile computer bank where they are going out and driving with laptops to get people signed up, work on workforce development, interview skills, job training, frankly, telehealth, right? All of those instrumental issues that we need to think about holistically instead of piecemeal. So a lot more there, but I'll stop there and I'll turn it back to you, Kirstin.
Thank you. And we're going to try to dive in a bit more with some questions as well, but want to dive on into a more local level. Itha, you're here representing the important role that community organizations represent in meeting the needs of residents and really reaching residents. So can you tell us a little bit about what your organization is doing to address digital equity and affordability within this region?
Yeah, absolutely, Kirstin. Hello, everyone. My name is Itha Cow. I'm the Director of Digital Inclusion and Innovation at Neighborhood Allies. Before I launch into my little pitch about Neighborhood Allies, I do have to say what an honor it is actually to be on a panel with two other Asian Americans. I think that is one of the first times actually for me. And I'm from Central PA.
First time. I've got many
Super
years
cool.
on
Yeah, I
here,
was like,
so.
what? So just had to put that out there. Neighborhood Allies is a nonprofit organization focused on economic development. And just to share a little bit about myself and how I got into this role in digital equity to begin with, basically my background is in local government. I used to work for Heidi Norman, who was a speaker earlier today at the city of Pittsburgh. And then prior to working under her, I worked for former Mayor Bill Peduto on duties as assigned. I think that's what a lot of local government people do. So for the past 6 or so years, and I'm going to multiply that 6 by dog years, because I feel like if you work in government, nonprofit, or community, it's your life, right? I kind of fell into this. And so for former Mayor Peduto, I helped with a team to stand up the Rec to Tech program, which is the after-school STEAM and STEM learning programs across the city. We had 9 recreation centers that the city owned, and the vision was to have computer classes, coding, Legos, all this kind of makerspace curriculum. I think the challenge that we run into across Pittsburgh and everywhere is we have old buildings, old infrastructure, right? Cool, you can set up a router and you have service in one room and you don't have it in another. You got flooding, you got mold, you have crime, you have poverty, you have all these other issues, right? And so part of my work was to kind of highlight those issues so that the city could dedicate more funding towards repairing the actual spaces, bringing on educators. And so I think that program now under a current Mayor Gainey is going really well. And then I also worked with the city and the county housing authority to set up adult literacy programs on the federal side, and getting through all the federal red tape to bring computers and computer literacy through Computer Reach to the federal housing authority locations in the north side. How I came into this role, actually, I was still working at the city. COVID started, everyone was hoarding toilet paper. And I basically saw a Facebook post from a friend who basically was just looking for volunteers. And it was to help to refurbish laptops. It was just a picture of her sitting surrounded by stacks and stacks and stacks of laptops. I am not an IT expert. I am the person who breaks the computer. But I figured, why not? I can help. I have a car, right? I can make some time. And so I think we got probably almost 500 laptops refurbished and sent out to folks with around 30 volunteers, help stand up a website, all that stuff. I was asked to join Neighborhood Allies, where we no longer do computer refurbishing because we have a regional computer refurbisher, a couple across the region. But my department, out of the 7 total, there's only 6 here, but we have an internal racial equity department that all of us work with across the city of Pittsburgh, and then also the Wilkinsburg, Millvale, and then parts of the Hilltop. Next slide, please. So a little bit about what my department does. It is a small, mean, and lean team of 2. But we are reliant on all of the other colleagues. Neighborhood Allies has around 24 right now that work boots on the ground in the community. And the 4 focuses are investment in digital tools and skills, as Alka had mentioned. So Beyond the Laptops was a program that started during COVID, and it was the laptop distribution plus hotspots plus software plus whatever people needed to increase their skill sets. The second is Level Up 412, which is specifically geared towards digital skills. We are looking for volunteers, so please talk to me if you are interested in teaching children. It's very fun, and we're always looking for help, specifically in Homewood. The second project are the Digital Inclusion Centers. So that is a corporate social responsibility project that is funded by Verizon, and that essentially made me into a construction manager for building a makerspace at the Homewood YMCA, and then also a classroom at the Community College of Allegheny County, also in Homewood, right across the street. Those are slated to be finished by summer, but with every delay in construction materials, equipment, tech, everything, we shall see, but very excited for that to be complete. The third component I wanted to talk about is coalition partnerships. So we have brought on Jen Blatz. Jen, do you want to raise your hand? Hey, Jen. Jen is the executive director of the Greater Pittsburgh Digital Inclusion Alliance, GPDIA. I know you're inundated with lots of acronyms today, so here's another one. But essentially, it is a convening of 24 or more organizations that care about digital equity and inclusion. The second is we take part in the Pittsburgh Digital Equity Coalition, so PDEC, which is headed by the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, to write that 5-year plan so that we can potentially get a chunk of funding to work on this. And the fourth piece that both Lyle and Alka have spoken about is this ACP outreach. And so we are also reliant on our community partners, many of them who are here. We also need volunteers for that. So if you're interested, talk to me. I'm in the back by the computers. And then, of course, a partnership with Comcast through a generous grant to do outreach and then give folks laptops who need them. Next slide, please. So a plug for the digital inclusion convening that Jen at the front table, you can contact her about it if you're interested in joining. There are 3 work groups. There's digital skills, device access, and the affordable connectivity program. And so my team leads the 3rd work group. So those are the current partners. Your name can be on that list too if you are interested. There is no cost to join, but I think everyone's talked about it today. Partnerships is the only way to get stuff done. We have so many different municipalities, different neighborhoods, different people doing different work. Everyone's doing great work, but I think sometimes we're so busy that we don't have time to talk to each other about it, that this is kind of the solution that we're looking at. So next slide, please. A little bit about the Affordable Connectivity Program, a little bit more, because I feel like we've heard a lot about this program. But essentially, it's a federally funded program that will grant $30 a month, like Lyle said, for broadband service, and up to $75 a month for households on tribal lands, and then a one-time discount of up to $100 for any type of device, laptop, desktop, et cetera, if the household contributes $10 to $50 towards the price, which we understand is a barrier, hence free laptops. Next slide, please. So I think in terms of just outlining, ooh, that slide looks interesting. It aligned strangely. In looking at the eligibility, right, I think 200% of federal poverty guidelines doesn't tell you anything, so I just put in some of the monthly income versus the annual income of what that would look like for this region. Next slide, please. So in addition to the 200% federal poverty limit, if there is one member of your household who participates in one of these programs, that would make the entire household eligible, which is great. As a person who was on SNAP and came from a WIC household, I can say personally that at least the federal piece is way easier than a lot of the other federal paperwork that's required for any of these programs. Next slide, please. So yeah, just in short, the ACP is a 2-step enrollment process. So the first one is, do you qualify from the federal government? And then if you do, then the second piece is to reach out to Alka, just kidding, any internet service provider, whether it's Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, to see if they can basically switch you over and then give you that $30 credit. So we are currently working with a couple partners on our outreach and enrollment events because I think as all of us here are probably familiar with helping some sort of a family member or a friend or a colleague on any type of tech issue. I have become that person for my mom. I think all of us are able and if you have time and are willing to be a digital navigator. So thank you to all of the partners across the region who are going to be helping to enroll folks. I did share the beyondthelaptops.org website, so it is a quick FAQ on the ACP because it can get complicated. There's a lot of information out there, but just sharing that. Next slide, please. And that's it. That's my email address. And those are the two websites that you should check out. I'm in the back by the computers. I have many, many business cards because this is my first conference in a long time. So yeah, please come see me, and thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Itha, and
Sure.
all of our panelists.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep my questions fairly short, and I hope that all of you have started to write those down. If you have questions for our panelists, write them, hold them up, and we'll take those very soon. While we're going around and gathering your questions, I'm going to start with one for the panelists. I would like to know, we've talked a lot about the Affordable Connectivity Program, the ACP, and I'm going to put this question to Itha first. If we think about the challenges that you see and the challenges you anticipate in continuing to get word out about the ACP program and other forms of affordability assistance, what challenges do you see, and how do you propose mitigating those?
Great question. Yeah, so challenges I think that exist with any federal government program is the moment you say federal government, people are like, no, I don't want to be a part of that. So I think the trust issue that a lot of people have mentioned today is number one. Number two, I think we've also talked about it during this conference, is that just because you have the skills may not mean that you have the high-speed internet. Just because you have those two does not mean that you have a device at home. So I think oftentimes when we talk about digital equity, you have to have all three: the skills, the device, and the high-speed internet. And too often we see that you only have two out of the three. So that is kind of what I see.
Yeah, thank you. We do have some questions coming in, so we'll see how many we can get to. But to continue on this one, Alka, from the private sector side, can you tell us a bit about how you see those challenges being potentially mitigated?
Sure, and I might even bring in a couple other challenges, which Lyle, I'm sure, is top of mind as the program is continuing. So awareness, number one is awareness, right? If you look at the ACP uprate in Pennsylvania, I think it's still fairly low. And this is despite us having a net zero opportunity or a product or other ISPs having the same, right? How do we get to these communities? How do we work with these with trusted partners, digital navigators? We do it on our own as well. So you may have seen some of our colleagues at a table outside here who are experts at signing people up or telling people about the opportunity. And so awareness is still something that needs a lot of work and attention to. And again, it can't just be us, can't just be you. It's got to be all of you helping us in that conversation. The two other challenges I just want to highlight, it's sort of more high level in a policy consideration, is one is the money or the funding for the ACP program is appropriated at X amount, and I believe some statistics or some indications or estimations is that money will at some point run out by 2024. No guarantees of whether that funding will continue or not, right? That's up to Congress and where that goes. But I think something that keeps me up at night, frankly, is what happens after that, right? Are we as local communities thinking about how does that get bridged? What happens for those people who now we've worked so hard to get them signed up and onto ACP the last 2 years? What happens to them? And so I do think that's something that we do need to keep in mind. And then the third piece I'll just put out there, and this is something we just learned the hard way, frankly, in the fall or come October, November, is that we had folks signed up for ACP, and then there was an awareness, frankly, from the program itself that individuals had to recertify. And so that caused a whole bit of frustration, perhaps, on the part of consumers who had signed up. frustration in the part that now they had to go back, get their documentation, recertify effectively that they still qualified for ACP. And so unfortunately, that wasn't made aware, it wasn't clear to ISPs, I think. And so I think the program itself from a federal level is still getting ironed out, and there's still some nuances that can sometimes be news to many of us. And so again, a little bit of flexibility and diligence is required on that part. And then along those lines too, we also recognize that from the federal government side, they do sometimes change their APIs. And so our Comcast interface is connected to, the signups are routed through their APIs to our APIs, and when they make changes, it obviously affects us. And so, again, a lot of learning experiences that we've had with a program that comes out for the first time, for sure. But I think as that piece gets ironed out and there's better communication between the government and their changes and what's going on, and then more efforts locally with our partners in terms of awareness, so that we're getting people signed up so that we can demonstrate the need for the program to continue, the better.
That was a very thorough answer.
Sorry.
And I think it actually answered much of what this next question is, but I'm going to read it anyways, and perhaps Lyle can give a bit of additional context. This is a three-part question, but again, you've mostly answered it. How long is the ACP subsidy available? We know that it is subject to continued congressional approval, which none of us can predict here, but can talk about what we might be able to do. The second part of this is how long will the device subsidy be available? Kind of part of the same program. And the third question that perhaps we can just clarify a bit further is that how will eligibility be determined? Will it be annual? So perhaps we can just give a bit of description of how it works.
So the first two questions were associated with the stability, funding, $14.2 billion. Not all of that is for program funding. Some was for grants and other things, but generally speaking, it's pot of money. It is so far a one-time grant, but it's the wisdom of Congress to decide the future of the program. And a good way to get in trouble as a federal employee is to tell you what Congress is going to do, because not only will you be wrong, but then your boss will find out and you'll get fired. Don't like that. I'd like to pay my mortgage. So let me try to answer a question around the question. So Curtis Hansen from the Appalachia Regional Commission was just here, and the FCC, my team, did an Appalachia rural tour on ACP. You may have heard of that, right? ACP is loved in red states and blue states, in rural communities and urban communities. And so in terms of the way, this is Lyle, now this is not the FCC, do not quote, this is Lyle. So in the way politics is viewed in the prism of sides, right? This is one of those things that bridges sides. And so the wisdom of Congress is to listen to their constituents, their locally elected and appointed leaders, and community advocates and such. There is no side that is anti-ACP. And so while it is up to the wisdom of Congress to appropriate the money, and I am not predicting they will or not, it is just what that is. Separately, the future of the computer subsidy program is tied up in the legislation. So as long as the money exists, the computer subsidy exists. There is a recertification, annual recertification to ensure that participating households still qualify based on either participation or 200% of the poverty rate. And that's just primarily to make sure that the appropriation goes to the communities and the households that need it. I think I answered 3 questions. Is that close? Right.
The third part was, I think, eligibility. Will it continue to be? How is eligibility determined? Is it annual? And
So
it's a
yes,
current
yes, it
program.
is. There is a. Once you apply and you are accepted, there is an annual recertification, household consumer recertification.
Mm-hmm.
Did I answer that question?
I think that was a very thorough answer.
Yeah.
And the next question
Oh,
builds right
Kirstin.
on that.
Yeah. Oh. Sorry, Kirstin, that was me.
Oh,
The phantom voice.
it's echoing.
Throw my voice. If I may add too, right? Like I think a lot of people talk about what if the money goes away, right? And my response is, so what? If the money goes away, why can't we, this is from the community grassroots level, but why can't we then find those folks, because now we have a register of who needs help and then support them that way.
Well, there was a follow-up to this question.
Yeah.
This is a different person, but it ties really well in with that. So maybe you want to just continue and address this one. Is there assistance available for the Affordable Connectivity Program, the ACP, or otherwise, for people and families who are over 200% of the poverty level, so that they end up being able to afford service, being able to afford devices, and not be stuck? This is what's written here, between a rock and a hard place, which is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I take that?
Absolutely.
So 200% is not the acid test. There are a lot of households now who are getting ACP who are not at the 200% of poverty rate or lower. It is just whether or not you are a participant in a qualifying program. One of the really easy to grasp, low-hanging description is if your child goes to a school and gets free or reduced school lunch at the school, then your household qualifies. There are a lot of children whose households do not meet the 200% qualification, but they go to a CEP school. And so the entire school gets free or reduced school lunch regardless of the means of the household. So for those families, as an example only, they are qualified for ACP. Separately, there are others. I am not an expert on a Pell Grant, but I would tell you that for the Pell Grant community is active in this as well. But I do, in the spirit of trying to answer the question behind the question, the primary purpose of the ACP is to assist households who are low income.
Right, so lots of resources out there, still gaps to be met, but one step at a time. Do we have any other questions that are coming in? In the meantime, I'm going to go to one final question, and if we don't have other questions coming in, we're going to do some closing comments. We have talked a lot about the Affordable Connectivity Program. That's one program. It is the most substantial program out there to assist with affordability, but there are other actions being taken, and so I wanted to put a final question to Lyle to share a bit about some other actions that the FCC is taking to address affordability and equity throughout their work.
So in terms of the affordability and equity portfolio, the FCC's doing a number of things simultaneously. We're just trying to, as everyone says, build the plane while we fly the plane. The broadband map has been mentioned a lot before, and so I have a pitch. Broadbandmap.fcc.gov. Our maps have not been the best in the past. I am using understatement while trying to protect my agency. So there had been a push to get communities to update, to have their consumers and bulk update the map prior to the BEAD deadline, which had passed. But I want to dissuade any sort of rumor that we are no longer taking challenges. The challenges will live forever, and that's because changes will live forever. Communities get built, communities fall. In rural areas, suddenly there's a new thing, and there's not a new thing. And unless we all just condition ourselves to make sure as part of our portfolio as elected and appointed or leaders in sort of this environment to keep the maps up to date, I fear that long after we're retired, and it's going to be a long time, but still, long after we're retired, our successors will still be back here again with bad maps. So let's build that into our mentality. Separately, in terms of the digital equity portfolio, the FCC has launched major rulemaking, and we are now in the notice of proposed rulemaking stage seeking comments about prevention of digital discrimination. And before we all kind of step back with digital discrimination, that happens across across all sorts of communities, rural communities, communities which are otherwise invisible to the naked eye, the disability community, people who are deaf or hard of hearing or have a developmental disability. We are taking both input on notice of proposed rulemaking, as I said, which is available on fcc.gov/live. And then we are embarking on a series of listening sessions that will come across the country. Today, we announced one that will be held next week in Los Angeles. Okay, so we're friends here. I'm not supposed to say this, so if you are interested in attending a hypothetical listening session in Baltimore on the 6th, stand by for an announcement, and just, this is a schedule, clear your calendar schedule. There's a task force with Chairwoman Rosenworcel's highest level folks who lead the Anti-Digital Discrimination Task Force, and we would love to hear stories. It is a listening session. And so, you know, if I lived in rural Pennsylvania and I see my urban Pennsylvania, this is not Pennsylvanians against Pennsylvanians, this is just my story, right? I might have a story to discuss about my experiences in accessing broadband as a rural consumer who has that should have the equal access, equal opportunity when it comes to broadband. So that's sort of the highlighted things we're doing for digital equity and affordability. Thanks for the question, appreciate it.
Yeah, we could probably go on a lot longer on this topic. There's always more to be said, as with all of the panels we've had today, but we're gonna try to close up here. I'm gonna go to our last two panelists to give some closing comments. Itha, do you have any closing comments for your thoughts on next steps for digital equity priorities for our region?
Yeah, I think it's something that I definitely learned working with the Public Housing Authority. You know, those of you who may already know, residents of the public housing authorities, they get their utilities paid for, gas, water, electric. I think that internet access is a utility and it should be treated as such, and I believe that it is a right to every person.
Right. So a couple quick high-level aspects. One, I think has been said already, but I do want to reinforce it, is capacity building. Everything that you heard earlier about timing for the state programs and the federal funding, that seems like it's far away, but all the capacity building from a local county nonprofit perspective should be happening right now. And I just want to say, you know, of course, as Comcast, we definitely want to partner. We recognize, again, that this doesn't happen without partnerships, frankly. And we've seen success, and where we've seen success is where we've done public-private partnerships or working with the philanthropic communities. And especially when we're talking about these rural areas, that is how it's gonna get done. I will say too that it shouldn't just be broadband and or those of us who are interested in broadband being in this room. We should be having the healthcare industry in this room. We should be having the workforce economic development type organizations in this room, right? All of this is connected. If we aren't connected, all those other pieces don't work either. And that's how our communities rise. And then the last thing I'll just say real quick, I think Todd talked earlier about the importance of a resilient and sustainable network. And I just want to take that one step further and talk about we also need to be thinking about a resilient and sustainable organization, whether it's an organization, whether it's a program. Everything that we're doing around broadband, we should be thinking about how do we ensure that there's resiliency and sustainability, because as you said, Lyle, we're going to be back here. We're going to be back here, right? And so we can't just be solving for this one moment in time or this one piece of funding that's coming down. How are we thinking about this such that there is sustainability and our communities can thrive? And so we definitely want to be partners in meeting that moment, because we are at that moment. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Right, well, I'd like to say thank you to all of our excellent panelists for being here and for sharing their insights with us today. I also wanted to mention there is a table in the hallway with information from the FCC and guidance on how to sign up for the Affordable Connectivity Program. They've got flyers, so if you'd like any of that information, go visit their table. And with that, I know we pretty much filled our time here, so I'm going to pass it over to Byron Stauffer from Indiana County to introduce the next panel, which will be the Pennsylvania Statewide Implementation Plan and Summary of Regional Efforts.
Good job.